Promote a universally beneficial and inclusive economic globalization and build an Asia-Pacific community. That's the message Chinese President Xi Jinping sent to the world on Friday during a speech at the first session of the 32nd APEC Economic Leaders Meeting in Gyeongju, the Republic of Korea. He put forward a 5-point proposal for realizing this goal. What specifically did President Xi say, however, during the informal leaders meeting, and how will all this impact the region in Asia-Pacific and the wider global economy? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Liu Xin. I'm pleased to be joined from Shanghai by Susan Thornton, Senior Fellow of Yale Law School Poltsai China Center and former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia and Pacific Affairs, and from Hong Kong, Special Administrative Region Professor Li Cheng, Founding Director of the Center on Contemporary China and the World at the University of Hong Kong. The warmest welcome to both of you, and thank you very much for joining us. As I said, on Friday morning, President Xi Jinping gave this very important speech at the APEC Informal Leaders Meeting. And in order to achieve what he said, which is building a universally beneficial and inclusive economic globalization and building an Asia-Pacific community, he made 5 proposals, for instance, to make joint efforts to safeguard the multilateral trading system, to build an open regional economic environment, to maintain the stability and smooth flow of industrial and supply chains, to promote digitalization and greening of trade, as well as to promote universally beneficial and inclusive development. Let me go to Susan first. From what you just heard, how timely and relevant are his words?
Well, I think we see the APEC countries meeting in Korea this year at a very pivotal point in sort of the development, not just of international trade, but of globalization generally. Of course, we know there's been a kind of a backlash against globalization, with a lot of countries moving to try to indigenize production and supply chains. And so I think it's an important time for this group to be meeting and trying to figure out how to think about the changes that have come in the international trading system and where we should be going. I'm certainly myself a fan of trying to make trade more open. I think openness and trying to promote development in the region and around the world is job number 1 for all countries, especially major countries like the US and China. So I think it's an important time for countries to be getting together and talking about this. And without knowing exactly what President Xi is proposing in some of those proposals, I think, a lot of those things are things that have been talked about at APEC for many years.
We'll walk our audience through just a little bit, because this is very fresh from the oven, if I may say it this way. Let me turn to Professor Li. In President Xi's speech, he said, the rougher the seas, the more we must pull together. How much does that resonate with the other regional leaders who are meeting in RK?
I think it will resonate very well with the countries in the region, APEC countries, but also the international community. In my view, President Xi touches the right buttons, whether it be multilateralism, open trade, digital development, sustainability or green development, and the last, the inclusive growth that come very, very strongly. I think that particularly from China, there are a lot of countries concerned about the industrial policy in China. And I think that Xi Jinping make it very clear that the inclusive growth and cooperation, especially again, talk about multilateralism, open trade, and sustainability. This is certainly the right issues. I think that not only this meeting, but other meetings, international meetings and UN, people emphasize that. But this is in a very critical moment. As Susan just said rightly, there's a very strong anti-globalization trend in some corners of the world. Maybe in every country there's some component, but at least as China is the second largest economy and will be the host of the APEC meeting in the next year, made it very clear China committed to these common goals.
It's very much noted when President Xi talked about supply chain. He used this metaphor, which I'm going to quote here. He said, we must adhere to the principle of joining hands rather than letting go. We must extend rather than break supply chain. And he also urged trade partners to actively seek more points of convergence of interest and support the opening up and development of supply chains. Susan, how do you look at this message that President Xi, what exactly is he proposing?
Well, I think it is very important to look at the supply chains and how can we achieve a convergence, because right now we do see the breaking of supply chains from many fronts, right? We've seen the tit for tat kind of escalation between the US and China in the trade war, and we've seen other countries also getting involved in trying to shore up domestic supply chains versus relying on the complex supply chains that have evolved over the recent decades. I would certainly be a huge fan of trying to find a way to bring countries more into convergence around sort of supply chains, rules for trading, and more kind of fair and equal distribution of supply chain involvement. And I think that's what's going to be needed if we're going to keep open trade and globalization on the track going forward and not going backwards, which I think is what countries should hope for, including China and the United States. That's the way that we're all going to continue to, and this is a phrase I've heard Xi Jinping use in the past, let all boats rise together. And I think that's really what's at issue here. If we're not careful, we will see all the boats going down together.
Yeah, he very much liked to use this metaphor, this big sea. And he also described U.S.-China relationship as a huge ship in very choppy waters at this particular moment. But I want to follow up on what he proposed again for the purpose of economic integration. And I want to go to Professor Lee there. President Xi was talking about building synergy for an Asia-Pacific free trade area through dovetailing the high-quality implementation of RCEP, which is a very important regional economic arrangement, and the expansion of CPTPP, which is the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. That is an updated version of the original TPP after President Trump pulled the U.S. out in his first term. Now, China submitted application to join the CPTPP in 2021, and this year in June, China said it's fully ready to join. What exactly does President Xi mean by utilizing the opportunity of the expansion of the CPTPP and the high-quality implementation of RCEP?
Well, China, as we know, that play a very, very important role in international institutions, particularly with a multilateral approach. You talk about RCEP. RCEP now had 10 ASEAN countries plus Australia and Singapore, New Zealand, and also Japan and South Korea. And so it's a very large economic integration bloc. But China also wanted to join the others, as you just mentioned. So it's not the bloc thinking, but rather international community should work together. At the time that there's an anti-globalization trend, China wanted to join from other countries to benefit from free trade, from the international economic integration. But also the world faces serious challenges, whether it be technology or environment, climate change. So this can also play a very, very important role, especially in this region, severely hit by environmental problem, climate change.
This has been a very busy week, right? Actually, the past 2 weeks have been very busy, and a lot of people have been watching what's happening for China in terms of planning for the next 5-year plans, which is the 15th 5-year plan. And only on Tuesday, the recommendations of the CPC Central Committee for formulating the 15th 5-year plan for national economic and social development were made public. And President Xi, at his speech in the ROK, in the APEC meeting, he he alluded to the 15th five-year plan, and he stressed that China must continue to expand opening up at the institutional level, safeguard the multilateral trading system, promote broader international economic flows. Susan, how does China's focus on higher quality institutional opening up chip in with the agenda of APEC economies?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I mean, President Xi also talked about the fourth plenum and China's domestic goals and its economic development in the meeting with President Trump, of course, indicating, China's plan going forward and what the focus is on high quality development, modernization, et cetera. We've all been watching the story of China's modernization development these many decades, and it's certainly impressive, and it's, I think, well understood that China wants to continue to modernize and develop find ways of increasing productivity in the economy. And the real question is the one you ask, is how does it chime with other countries' goals and plans going forward for their economic development? And I think, frankly, this is the real crux of the matter that we come to. As both Chung and I have said, we're at a real moment of transformation, a pivot in sort of the global order, and it's very much around this question of economic development, equal and fair kind of trading regimes and international institutions that can, order trade and investment, restrain countries from going into these kind of tit-for-tat, downward spiral, lose-lose cycles. And I, for one, would be happy to see the CPTPP develop into a larger organization as long as the high standards rules could be upheld. And I think that might be a way of, trying to remedy the significant kind of shortcomings that we've seen in the World Trade Organization to date. But as Chung said, there are many areas where we have lagged behind in trying to regulate trade in the digital area, in some of the new technological areas, in biological kinds of instruments. And so I think those all need to be tackled at a multilateral global level. And if we can manage to do that by either rejuvenating the World Trade Organization, which would be great, but it looks like it will be difficult, or finding new ways to do that, I would be in favor.
Well, very interesting point, Susan, you made just there, because actually the number one proposal the Chinese president made to his APEC colleagues is about upholding the multilateral trading regime, the multilateral international order. And he specifically talked about the reform of the World Trade Organization must stay on the right track. And he also talked about that the rules of international trade must evolve with the times to better represent the interests of developing countries as they continue on the path of development. Professor Lee, despite all the talks, all the frustrating reality that the World Trade Organization has been at a paralysis, why is China so committed to make this thing work? Why does China want to get everybody moving towards the goal of revitalizing the World Trade Organization, despite all the obstacles?
Well, first of all, China certainly benefits from the globalization. And look at the reform era, the past 40 years, China emerged as the second largest economy in the world. So Chinese public opinion are far more positive about that. But one thing, when you talk about the fourth platinum, one thing come out very strongly: Chinese government emphasize domestic consumption. This is very much in line with the international community. You look at the United States, the Treasury Secretary asked China to emphasize on domestic consumption. And the European country, ASEAN countries also hope that China will stimulate domestic consumption. But domestic consumption actually emerged as a central theme of the fourth platinum for the next 5 years. So this is what Susan and your program emphasized, the converging points. I think this will resonate very well, even with the United States. Also hope that China will domestically spend more. This will be contribute to the global economy. So we do see some kind of, not everything is a conflict or zero-sum game. We see the common ground and common interest and the converging points. So this is, again, how fourth president related with this conference, related with the summit that two presidents achieved.
Well, right now it seems that the color of the world turned slightly brighter. I'm also wearing a bright pink today because it seems there are some reason for celebration, obviously coming from the events that have been happening in the ROK. Susan, without going into much details, because we do not know how things are going to unfold, but from the messages, from the events that we've seen in the ROK, what signals are you reading that are you getting a slight sense of hope that things can work out? It doesn't have to be that bad.
Oh, absolutely. I think that the meeting between President Trump and President Xi sent a very strong signal of kind of positive momentum and also a kind of a confidence that we can manage the ups and downs in this relationship as long as our two leaders can come together and can talk through things, that a lot of things can be managed and we don't have to get to the point of conflict, which I think is concerning an awful lot of people. So I took that signal very strongly away from the summit. And, you know, the leaders of the two countries have not been talking as often in the recent years as they had in the past. I think that showed that the absence of communication can lead to this kind of downward spiral in and of itself. So the fact that the two have pledged not only to meet this time, but they have a series of meetings now set up throughout the next year, that is, to me, maybe the strongest outcome from the meeting. Of course, there were a lot of other things agreed, and we don't have too many details, and it looks like we'll have at least a year of kind of stabilization to talk through some of these things, which is also very good. But for me, the strongest thing is the signal coming out from the two leaders meeting and the positive things both have said about the meeting.
I have been told that we can cross over to Professor Bert Hoffman, who is joining us on the line. He is professor at the East Asian Institute at the National University, Singapore. Professor Hoffman, good to have you on the show. I would like to know your read on the signals coming out of APEC. What are you reading? For instance, the 5-point proposal that the Chinese president has made to the community about building a universal and inclusive economic globalization. What are you reading? What stayed with you?
So that, of course, is a great objective. And APEC is a really good platform to start debating what that would exactly mean. And the way I see it is this is really, if you want, an alternative for discussions that, as Susan said, should take place within the WTO. But those discussions right now are very difficult. Not all the members are very cooperative with WTO at this point in time. So discussing this in the context of APEC is really good. A further positive element in what I view is China's attempt to become a member of the CPTPP. The reason I'm saying that is that some of the sticking points that are now on hold between the U.S. and China really have to do with issues such as state support, issues such as data transfer, issues such as subsidies. If China were to become a member of the CPTPP, those issues would have to be dealt with. So it's a very positive step that China is attempting to enter this more sophisticated trade arrangement, and that can then become a model for, say, the rest of Asia first, and maybe the world. The rest of Asia, I mean, especially all the RCEP members, which is broader than the CPTPP members. So this step towards APEC, I think, is a very good step, and it will help resolve some of these big issues that are currently prevailing in the world economy.
Yeah, Professor Lee, let me turn to you. Let's talk a little bit more about the CPTPP. And from an economic point of view, the Asia-Pacific region is projected, according to latest analysis, is projected to grow at about 3.1% this year. That's slightly higher than the previous forecast of 3%. How much further impetus is China being a part of that economic arrangement going going to inject for the region? Do you foresee some tangible changes in the near future? As I said, China says it's ready to join in this June. Exactly when will China join? How much do we know?
Well, whether it be ASEAN country or China, their growth rate is much higher than the 3%. I think this will continue, but the decision in China just announced is very much in line with Li Qiang Premier's talk in the UN. Also, commitment that moving away from the developing country to take more responsibility. I think China can contribute greatly. But as Bird said, that this is indicate China will make a commitment to promote the domestic reform and also make sure that China will be more open, more inclusive, and more cooperative with the outside world. This is very, very important. But also, I want to echo what Susan said in terms of the summit. I think it's very, very important. Certainly, that the U.S. and China have a lot of converging interests. But more importantly, Chinese leaders also very happy to see Donald Trump consider China as a friend, as a Chinese leader as a friend. This is very, very important. This reminds me, Dr. Kissinger, Kissinger said, the summit, both sides are quite different. U.S. largely interested in talk about issues, trade issue, and the South China Sea issue, Taiwan issue. China look at the broader strategic position. You treat China as a friend, partner, rival, or enemy. That make a huge difference. Now, President Donald Trump make it very clear: China is a friend. Chinese leader is a friend. That means a great deal. I hope that both sides will acknowledge, will really do things. But also, one important thing is both countries should clear up their domestic issues because there's some common challenges. For the U.S., shrinking of middle class, and China also face a serious challenges how to maintain the middle class lifestyle and etc. So we see the commonality. So China's participation in international institutions, it's very, very important. But we see China's clear commitment in that regard.
Susan, let me go back to you. From the images coming out of the APEC meeting this morning, we clearly see U.S. Senior government officials taking the seat. This clearly sends a message because President Trump left the ROK after his meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, but ahead of the informal economic leaders meeting. What message does this send? Is he trying to say something, or he really has to hurry home for some other more important occasions?
Well, I think it's probably not a secret that President Trump is not a big fan of large multilateral meetings, and he got a lot of business done already in Korea in the last couple of days, doing a lot of bilateral meetings with other heads of state who were there. He's been on the road. He went to the EAS summit in Malaysia. He made a couple of other stops along the way, and I think leaving his economic team in charge is the way he felt was the best way to deal with, a long trip in Asia with a lot of meetings. And so I think he probably felt like he got a good start on the conversation in the bilateral meetings that he had before he left, and leaving the team to take up the rest of the discussion. It's, as a former diplomat, probably not what I would prefer. It's, and I think President Trump also is not a big fan of big multilateral economic rulemaking meetings. And so I think that explains his, somewhat lack of enthusiasm for sticking around for the meeting. But I don't think it's meant as a sign of personal disrespect to anybody or any of the other leaders who stayed. And obviously, the Asia Pacific region is the most dynamic area of the world economy in the coming decades. And so everybody recognizes that. And I don't think that his absence is meant to give any short shrift to that. I think it's just, leader scheduling, et cetera.
Understood. Professor Hoffman, what is your take? I mean, does that not send a message that the United States doesn't really care about maintaining its image as a regional economic leader in the APEC area? And secondly, will that dampen somehow the enthusiastic by the host and the other member economies to come to some kind of agreement that can be, offered to the world as a concrete outcome of this important meeting?
So I'm with Susan that it doesn't look great, but there's also reasons why he actually goes back to the United States. As you know, there is a lockdown of the federal government because of budget issues, and that is a very important issue for him. He did go to the ASEAN summit, which was important, and I think that there the ASEAN centrality that was proclaimed by lots of American presidents, actually he gave legs to that concept. So for him, APEC compared to ASEAN was probably less important, and given the urgent matters at home, he went home. But I do recognize Susan's remark that President Trump is not a big fan of big multilateral meetings.
Finally, in 1 minute, probably, Professor Lee, what do you think will be the biggest outcome of this APEC, given what we've seen, the meeting between the Chinese president and the U.S. president, the official state visit by China to ROK in 11 years, and, the gathering of regional leaders, what will be the biggest impact?
Well, it's a very regular meeting, and including the summit between Chinese leaders and the U.S. leader, two largest economy, the major power in the world. But also what Susan and Bert said, we should not be naive. The meeting itself cannot resolve the problem. You earlier mentioned 5 points, and actually Xi Jinping's 5 points resonated very well with most of the country, but certainly you see the tensions between Donald Trump and some of the things that he may not agree into multilateralism, sustainability, and etc. So you do see some tensions, but also some of the issues remain. But also we talk about both countries, China and United States, need to deal with domestic issues. But what Bert said, it's very, very important. The nature of the problem in both countries is different. In my view, U.S. is far serious, far more worrisome in terms of spirit, in terms of divides, in terms of tensions. China, relatively speaking, is much better shape. That make a huge difference. I think the United States need to rethink about how to fit in the international, the framework. I think, but the reason the obstacle for U.S. president to do that is a domestic tension. But on the other hand, further U.S. alienate a lot of even allies, not to mention about the problems with China. Even the nuclear development in the recent week is also disturbing.
Yeah, well, certainly a very complex issue, but one sentence to go away with, probably President Xi saying China's development and revitalization can go hand in hand with MAGA. I think that is a very important point to reflect on. Many thanks to my guests, Susan Thornton joining us from Shanghai, Professor Li Cheng joining us from Hong Kong, and Professor Bert Hoffman joining us on the line from Singapore. Thank you all so much. With that, we come to the end of this special edition of The Point with me, Lu Xin, coming to you from Beijing. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Lu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.